Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're talking about something pretty fundamental. What happens when the very system that's supposed to give you justice is the one that takes it away?
Just think about that for a second. That wasn't some random insult on the street. No, that was said out loud in open court to a man who was literally there because he couldn't hear, in a case that was about to decide his entire future.
So yeah, that's the big question we're tackling today. We're going to dive into one man's fight and see what happens when the scales of justice aren't just a little off balance, but are actually deliberately tilted against you. All right, Section 1. To really get why this is such a big deal, you first have to know who we're talking about. Let's meet the man at the center of all this, Mark Saltz. See, this isn't just any old landlord-tenant dispute. We're talking about Mark Saltz, a 73-year-old guy, a respected educator who taught at top design schools for almost 3 decades. A dedicated artist. I mean, his home was his studio. This was the place where he was supposed to kick off the next chapter of his life's work.
So you can imagine, when he ends up in housing court in 2021, it's not just his apartment on the line. It's everything. His home, his career, even his dignity. Being able to participate in that case, that wasn't just some legal formality. It was absolutely crucial for his survival.
Okay, now for Section 2. And this is where things really start to go off the rails. It all began with a pretty simple and legally protected need. This wasn't some crazy, complicated request. It was just about having access. Basic access to justice. You know, federal law is super clear on this. There's this thing called the Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA, and it basically says courts have to provide reasonable accommodations so that people with disabilities can participate just like anyone else. This isn't a suggestion, it's not optional, it's a fundamental civil right. But for 3 whole years, the system just completely failed him. I mean, look at this timeline. Right from the start, in 2021, Mr. Saltz tells the court he has a hearing impairment. He asks again and again for standard stuff, like real-time captioning. And for 3 years, crickets, just ignored. And it all leads up to this unbelievable moment in January 2024, when he gets evicted while he is in a hospital bed. This chart just lays it all bare, doesn't it? The gap between what the law required and what he actually got it's just staggering. The law says give him real-time captioning. The court's answer? The judge will just speak louder. Think about that. Instead of accommodating his disability, they basically just highlighted it, humiliated him for it. And it gets worse. This wasn't just neglect. The court's refusal to help actually created this hostile environment. It gave the green light for the other side's lawyer to openly mock him, to call him a head faker, and the judge just let it happen. They basically signed off on the harassment. So then we get to the absolute breaking point, January 2024. He's in the hospital with a life-threatening infection. He's completely incapacitated. And what does the opposing lawyer do? They use this moment, this medical crisis, to lie to the court, claiming he's in drug rehab to fast-track the eviction. And when his legal team shows up with hospital records to prove it, the court just dismisses the evidence on a technicality. The result? He's evicted, completely unable to defend himself. Okay, Section 3. So all of this wasn't just some abstract legal failure. It had a devastating, very real human cost. We're not just talking about a flawed process. We're talking about the complete destruction of a man's life. Let's start with the money, the economic damages. This number, up to $265,000, that's the tangible stuff. That's his lost home, his destroyed art studio, the medical bills from all the stress. But honestly, that's just the tip of the iceberg. Because then you have the non-economic damages. And how do you even put a price on this? This $500,000 is an attempt to quantify the sheer pain, the suffering, the public humiliation he went through. Imagine being 76 years old, being mocked in a courtroom and losing absolutely everything. And finally, this big number. $1 million for punitive damages. Now, this isn't about making Mr. Saltz whole again. This is about punishment. It's about sending a loud, clear message to the system that this kind of deliberate indifference is completely unacceptable and making sure it never ever happens to anyone else. So you add it all up, and the total estimated damages could be as high as $1.765 million. That's a huge number, and it really shows you just how severe and wide-ranging the harm was. This wasn't a small mistake. It was a cascade of civil rights violations.
So that brings us to Section 4, and a really important question. How in the world do you fight for justice when the justice system itself is the one you're fighting against?
Well, the fight is built on some really solid legal ground. First, clear violations of the Americans with Disabilities Act. They just flat out refuse to provide accommodations. Then you've got due process violations. He was denied his fundamental right to be heard. And finally, equal protection violations. He was treated differently, worse, specifically because of his disability.
And this strategy to fight this isn't just one single lawsuit. No, it's this really smart, multi-front attack. You file a federal lawsuit, you go to the city's Human Rights Commission, you file a complaint against the judge themselves. The idea is to apply pressure from every single direction to force some accountability.
Because, and this is so important, this case isn't just about the money. The money is a tool. The real goal here is to use this case as a catalyst, as a lever, to force real systemic change.
And the demands are super clear, super practical. We're talking mandatory training for all judges and court staff on the ADA. We're talking about getting the right technology, like real-time captioning, into all courtrooms. And maybe most important of all, putting some kind of independent monitoring in place to make sure these rules are actually being followed, not just sitting in a binder somewhere.
You know, when you step back, Mark Saltz's story really forces us to ask a tough question about who we are. Our system promises justice for all. But what does that promise really mean? This case challenges us to figure out how we make sure that promise isn't just empty words, especially for the voices that are the hardest to hear.